Fear and hopelessness.
More than 5,000 businesses closed since March. The number of people shot up by a staggering 84%. Headlines declaring New York City dead forever.
1,600 stores were looted and almost 4,000 people were arrested.
And when night fell, the destruction began. Cameras capturing looters inside this Urban Outfitters at 14th and 6th, moments after the windows were shattered.
But while the looting and rioting stopped, other crime did.
In New York City, homicides in the last month are up 50% compared to the same time last year, and 34% year to date.
Going through there, you had the sense that nobody was ever going to go fix that.
The situation outraged 23-year-old Curtis Sliwa, the night manager at a McDonald's restaurant. He hit upon the idea of citizen patrols to look for and interrupt subway crimes.
I'm not just going to sit home and let this situation get totally out of hand. I love my city, and I'm going to do something about it.
Pushed and shot Curtis Sliwa, the Guardian Angels founder and leader, is recovering from surgery.
You catch 6 bullet holes, but you know something? They're not going to stop me. Nobody in this town ever did. Nobody ever will. And I will not move. I will improve this city. Good for you.
Thousands of NYPD officers are protecting the streets last night.
Sliwa is running for mayor. The Guardian Angels founder and longtime talk radio host says violent crime has got out of hand.
This city has given so much to so many millions. We're going to make sure that we get everyone that opportunity again, but it starts with safe streets, safe subways, safe parks, safe schools, and making sure that our children get an education that they deserve.
I don't know about you all, but whenever I see that video, I get amped. I'm excited for Curtis Sliwa mayor's office and Curtis Sliwa, New York City. And I start to think kind of what would New York City look like? We know it's going to be safer streets, safer subways, safer schools, a better property tax system. But then I also start to think, I mean, Curtis is birthed in the subways. So how would he do in Gracie Mansion up there in the High Life? And we actually have an inside look at what Gracie Mansion would look like with Curtis Sliwa in it.
A sneak peek of the paintings, artifacts, and documents, and a walk through the house that's one of the most historic and oldest in New York. Let's go inside.
Look at all these cats behind me. Each and every one of them would have been killed in an animal control shelter had we not rescued them.
Without further ado, Curtis Sliwa.
I think I'm not going to use that microphone. Who is responsible for the audio here? Oh, okay. First off, it's great to be at Chaz Palminteri's restaurant. His staff, his management. And remember, this is the heart of the theater district. And a lot of people say, well, what Curtis, you as mayor, what are you going to do for the theater district, which is so important to the economic, cultural, and entertainment complex of New York City? Well, I don't have to start from scratch. Let me take you in the time capsule. 1988. This area was devastated by crack cocaine like many parts of the city of New York. But this was the crown jewel, the Great White Way, Broadway, off-Broadway, Restaurant Row, just 2 blocks away. And all of a sudden, a gentleman who was a fixture in New York City, Joe Allen, famous restaurateur, of Joe Allen's and Orso's, unfortunately recently passed away, Barbettas, all the great restaurants, half of them had closed on Restaurant Row because 8th Avenue had become like the Green Line in Beirut. You couldn't travel to the other side without having your personal items stolen, your car broken into, crack was being dealt, prostitutes, pimps. The city in Times Square was sliding into the abyss. And the Great White Way was going dark. Theater after theater was not doing shows because it was too dangerous. So when people say, what are you going to be able to do? Exactly what we did in the late 1980s. And you may have remembered Ed Koch said to the theater owners and restaurateurs, if you invite the Guardian Angels in, you'll get no more police. And I'll never forget, Joe Allen stood up to the mayor and said, you're not giving us police now, what do we have to lose? And many of you who lived through that era, remember we started to take back first Restaurant Row, then the Theater District, block by block, alleyway by alleyway, till eventually Rudy Giuliani himself, who was U.S. Attorney for the Southern District at that time, sat down with his staff and said, how can a group of unarmed young men and women with no special powers or privileges do what the best trained police department in the world was incapable of doing? And then he recognized because the cops weren't being allowed to do their job. They weren't allowed to make drug busts in uniform. They would have to call back to the precinct, alert the detective bureau. By the time a detective could be dispatched to the location, the drug dealers had fled. And it made it appear as if the police were apathetic and indifferent because there they were in their blue uniforms. The citizens would run out, look, they're dealing crack cocaine, and they'd have handfuls. And the police were not permitted to make drug arrests. So now, who was vilified at that point? The police. Why aren't the police making drug arrests? Did you think Ed Koch or his police commissioner at that time, Benjamin Ward, would acknowledge what the problem was? Of course not. So it took a volunteer organization that I led to lead the path back. Rudy never forgot that. And the day he was elected mayor, he said, from now on, the Guardian Angels are part of public safety in New York City. They are the best of what the sons and daughters of this city can do. They don't ask for anything in return. They come from the poorest neighborhoods. And it is everything we should be supporting and encouraging. And that gives you an idea where I've spent most of my time, in the poorest neighborhoods, in the projects, on the subways, in those places where, to be quite honest, Republicans have not been seen since Abraham Lincoln was first put on the $5 bill. So when I'm in those neighborhoods, I'm not having to introduce myself. It's Curtis. They don't think of me as a Republican, a Democrat. They don't think of me as a politician. It's Curtis. If they don't like what I said or what my opinion is, that's just Curtis. But I've earned the right to say it. I have the street credibility and the knowledge of what it's going to take to get this city back on track. As we took this area of Times Square, the Theater District, Restaurant Row, and got it back on track. We can do that for the whole city. The other day, I went out to pay my respects to the police officer who had been killed in the line of duty. If you remember, he was doing traffic control on the LIE. And a woman who was high and stoned, and not ironically because it seems to fit the bill of late, had just done rap songs about killing cops. I mean, you say to yourself, no. And behind the wheel, she was impaired, and she crashed into this police officer. He was struck, went up about 150 feet in the air, and unfortunately lost his life. So when I lined up out there with a lot of police officers who had traveled from different parts of the Northeast sector to pay their respect, and citizens, I assumed that everybody running for mayor would come out and pay tribute. Maybe they didn't show up when I showed up, but they would show up either in the course of the wake or maybe the next day for the funeral mass at the Greek Orthodox Church and the police officer's burial. I was surprised to see only Andrew Yang there, to his credit, and myself. And I was doing introductions for Andrew Yang with a lot of the police and the police departments because, unfortunately, I've attended a lot of these events when police officers were killed in the line of duty. So I wanted to give him credit for being the lone candidate to take the time to pay respects. But when I was making the rounds with all the different fraternal organizations, police departments, and groups, I said, gentlemen, ladies, you realize what next week is? Starting on Mother's Day, May 9th, to May 15th, it's Police Appreciation Week. We just had Nurses Appreciation Week this week. Before that, it was Teachers Appreciation Week. And do you know, everyone acknowledged that. It's not like I was telling them something they didn't know. And I said, okay, what events are taking place so we can honor the service of police officers, those who are retired, those who gave their life, those who were injured in the line of duty, those who are serving now. And they all looked at one another and said, Curtis, there's nothing scheduled. And for the first time, I realized I could be the mayor. Because they looked at me and they said, Mr. Mayor, what are you going to do? So they were looking to me for guidance, to rally up support for the police who have been downtrodden, who have been viciously vilified by our elected officials, who all want armed security officers from the NYPD protecting them. They don't want to defund those units, but they want to defund the police who are protecting the rest of us. Showing typical politicians do as I say, but not as I do. And I looked and I said to myself, wow, there's not even going to be any official recognition for police. You look at it, what has our society become? After 9/11, we recognized the police along with others were heroes. When the pandemic hit and the lockdown took place, they were essential workers. Remember every night at 7 o'clock, along with the healthcare workers, the firefighters, the EMTs, we applauded the police. And then all of a sudden, Mr. Floyd gets killed in the streets of South Minneapolis by a distant police department of 4, and our police department gets vilified for that. And their vehicles were burned, Molotov cocktails thrown at them, desecrated, vandalized, hundreds of vehicles, dozens of police officers injured in the line of duty. And yet, the very political officials who skate what is going to happen in the streets of New York City did not support the men and women in blue. They supported the violators, the vandals, the shooters, and the looters. And you said, why did we let that happen as a society? How could we allow this one man, Bill de Blasio, to take a wrecking ball and almost single-handedly destroy this city that we love? And a police department that was at one point the finest in the world. Everyone looked to the police department in New York City. They said their training, the way they handle situations, whether it's riots, demonstrations, acts of terrorism, are the most professional and proficient. And the technology that they've developed. Do you know, through all that summer of rioting and looting and demonstrating, we have drones at Floyd Bennett Field that we paid for, drones. Now you go to Floyd Bennett Field on a Saturday and Sunday, and young people and their fathers and mothers, they're flying drones in the air. There are commercials that are done with drones, newscasts done with drones. It's the coming way. But Mayor de Blasio said you can't use the drones. These are little drones. They could have been flying up and down the blocks, throughout the alleyways, determining who the looters and shooters were, so that the real people creating the problems would have been arrested. No, you can't use drones. The other thing that we have a lot of, the best in the world, are the cops on horses. You're on a horse, you can see everything that's going on. The horses and the men and the women on the horses are trained to deal with crowd control. No, you can't use that. You can't use facial recognition technology. Really? Cannot use it. We have it, but the police department is not permitted to use it. Now, there have always been mistakes in the past made when people, witnesses, point out the wrong people. It happens. You get hit in the head, you're the victim, you look around, you're woozy. The next thing you know, everybody looks the same. Is this the person? Is this the person? You pick a person, it happened not to be the person. and that young man or young woman is doing 10 years, 12 years, we learn later on, was the wrong person, and it was justice denied. Now we have facial recognition technology. Now, does it make mistakes sometimes? Yes, on occasion, but not as much as people who've been victimized, but we can't use that. So elected officials who are protected by the police, the city council, the mayor, decided to impair the police and strip them of all the technological tools that would help them do a better job that could have controlled the demonstrations and prevented the looting and shooting. When I was a young man and I was involved in civil disobedience and protests, you would have to get a permit for a protest. Not difficult to do. Go to One Police Plaza. If for any odd reason they didn't give you a permit, the New York Civil Liberties Union was in court, you got your permit. But as part of the agreement, you had to supply your own marshals. You had to train men and women who would be on the outskirts, who would control those within the epicenter, so that if it got out of hand, the marshals dealt with it. If it was too overwhelming for the marshals, that's when the police who were nearby would come in. That's the perfect way to do things. No. These demonstrators, what permit? We're just going into the streets. We're going to vandalize. F the police. All cops are bastards. ACAB, and words I'm not even going to describe here, that were being printed out in broad daylight in front of police, and police were being told, you can't do anything. And then you see people like Cuomo up in Albany with the state legislature who said, no bail. Okay, I understand. Look, I've been in lockup. I think I'm the only candidate who was locked up by the very police that I support again and again. So I understand. But New Jersey has a no bail law. It was working relatively well. It had a few kinks, a few rough edges, but they left the jurisdiction to judges. Ultimately, a judge, a man or a woman in black regal robes, could make a determination as to whether someone was a flight risk, a danger to themselves, or a danger to society. In New York, you're not permitted to do that. What's the purpose of having a judge? They're not letting a judge be a judge. And by the way, are we really worried that we have right-wing conservative judges in the judicial system of New York City? They've been appointed by Cuomo and de Blasio. They're liberal progressives. They're always going to lean in the direction of the accused, which I don't have a problem with, but they won't even let a judge be a judge. And look at the chaos and mayhem that we have. And then we have a governor who the other day said, I never ride the subway. Hell, none of them ride the subway. He said, are you crazy? Ride the subway? There's crime, there's homeless people, there's emotionally disturbed. Hey, Jerky Boy, you're in charge of the MTA. And then there's de Blasio, who's in a drug-induced psychosis from smoking too much Maui Wowie and Hindu Kush, who's saying, what are you talking about? Crime is at an all-time low in the subways. He said it again today. Wow. And he never rides the subway. So at least you'll have a mayor who rides the subway every day, who understands what has to be done, and most importantly, who is not just law and order as I am, refund the police, hire more police, support the police, get them out there to do the job they're being paid and trained to do, but let them know you cross the line, you violate people's rights. I'm your worst nightmare, Curtis Sliwa, because I've gotten wooden shampoos, I've had to get concrete facials, and I've had to suck concrete. So I know how you can cross the line, and they'll understand that. And as long as you tell them what the rules are, most will abide. But isn't it amazing? They eliminated qualified immunity for police officers because they're likely to get sued. But qualified immunity Andrew Cuomo has, and how many elderly people is he responsible for having killed? But when he's being sued, we're paying. He's got qualified immunity. All the elected officials have qualified immunity. The judges have qualified immunity. The district attorneys, the assistant district attorneys. Everyone has qualified immunity, not the police. They're going to have to get their own personal insurance policies. How are we going to find men and women to hire into the police department? Where are they going to get the money for qualified immunity that they have to purchase on their own? What do? Go to Lloyd's of London? Where are they going to get insurance at that time that's affordable? The first 5 years that a police officer is on duty, They're barely making subsistence pay. Many of them are living in the basements of their mothers and fathers. And then they want to force the cops to live in the 5 boroughs, not the other civil servants, but the cops. Well, why don't you create affordable housing? Why do you think they would travel 2 hours up to Dutchess County, 2 hours back, just to do an 8-hour shift and with overtime more? Because it's affordable there, and quite frankly, the quality of life is better and the public school system is better. But the point is, if they could have affordable housing, they might live in the 5 boroughs. So, as mayor, I have an answer for a lot of these issues. But I will tell you this. I will take the responsibility of putting together something for Police Appreciation Week. If I have been already anointed the future mayor of the city of New York, and I'm going to have to start making the decisions that Cuomo and de Blasio and our city council is not making on behalf of not just the police, but the citizens of New York City. And we're going to make sure that the children get a good education. They're going to learn about Christopher Columbus, but they're also going to learn about indigenous people. And you're not going to have a mayor when decisions are made by those that I've appointed to run divisions of government. A mayor, I had no idea that this was going on. Of course, this was your ideology. This is what you had promoted. When the citizens voted for a statue for Mother Cabrini, your wife said ixnay to that. I give credit to Governor Cuomo. He used our tax dollars to get it done, but he built the statue to Mother Cabrini in Battery Park. It was the will of the people. But this has always been de Blasio's penchant. He has not promoted American history. He has not promoted civics to the children. He basically promotes an anti-American agenda. And he's allowed it to seep into the fiber of the Department of Education, and he's let some of his appointees run wild with it. I don't blame them. I blame the mayor because it's mayoral control. He wanted mayoral control, and look at what he's done to the Department of Education. And we're going to keep the gifted and talented program. We're going to keep the specialty test. We're going to have way more vocational training because having come from neighborhoods where a lot of the young men and young women just didn't have the academic wherewithal, they could have learned the skill. And why wait for them to go to a trade school after junior high school or high school that we paid for with a federal Pell Grant when we had a captive audience and we could have given them a negotiable trade when they were in junior high school and high school. And the charter schools that I'm going to promote and seek to get more charter schools, they're also going to have vocational training. And parochial schools, private schools who have done a magnificent job, those that stayed open all during the pandemic, we got to figure out a way to get them tuition tax credits to the parents or guardians who send the children there, or vouchers, because they should be rewarded. The whole point is we want choice. We want parents and guardians to be able to send their children to the places where they feel their children or grandchildren are going to get the best education, because education is the way people lift themselves up and live the American dream. I'll never forget, when I was a kid, I went to Bildersley Junior High School in Canarsie, Brooklyn. And I remember my mother and I walked in, I was registering in, and I looked up and there was all the Arista Award winners. And I noticed there were like almost no Gentiles. I said to my mom, I said, hey, Mom, they're all Jewish kids. Thinking that she would spew some conspiratorial nonsense about how the fix was in for the Jewish kids, because most of the teachers were Jewish. That's what a lot of my peers said. But my mother straightened me out and said, Curtis, you want to be an Arista? Well, then follow what the Jewish kids are doing, because after school, what are you doing? You're playing stoop ball, box ball, Johnny on the Pony, buck, Ringalivio. Sometimes hot wiring cars with your cousins going for joyrides. Meantime, where are these Jewish kids going? To the library, doing extra credit reports. They're getting tutoring. You want a tutor, Curtis? You're not doing well in math. No, Ma, I'd rather not have a tutor. That's the difference. And so I recognize if you're going to compete academically, you got to follow in the footsteps of the achievers, not the deceivers. Not the deceivers. now look at the Asian community. They're not only being attacked, as Jews have been attacked before, for a variety of reasons. Most of it is the emotionally disturbed persons that we're going to get off the street. We're going to get them the medical and psychiatric care that they need and get them the medicine so that they can live a normalized life. What we're doing to them is a sin, an absolute sin, to let them roam about in the streets and the parks and the subways with no control of their mental faculties. Likewise with the homeless. Right across here, Times Square Hotel. That's a COVID-19 hotel. And yet the men in there are running every con game in the world at taxpayers' expense. And there are no programs. You walk into the Times Square Hotel, as I have on 3 occasions. I say, do we have drug counseling here? Alcohol rehabilitation? Do we have any care for the emotionally disturbed? No, none of that. Basically, it's a warehouse. You better be in by 10 o'clock at night or you lose your bed. And out the door you go at 7 in the morning. And what are you going to do from 7 in the morning to 10 o'clock at night but get into double trouble? This is warehousing. We're not dealing with the homeless issue. And lastly, a society that does not take care of its emotionally disturbed and homeless people is a society that probably does not take care of its unwanted animals. It all starts there. Because let's face it, for a lot of us, we'd much rather deal with our animals than our children, our grandchildren, our husbands, our wives, our aunts, our uncles. They don't give us any grief. But in this city, we spent millions of dollars to run what they call animal care and control. Very little care, a lot of control. Because within 72 hours, if somebody turns in a dog, cat, or another animal, maybe they can no longer care for it. Or we find dogs and cats, strays, and other animals, 72 hours, and they're euthanized. You don't know that. Most citizens, they just assume, okay, they're adopted out. Yes, some are. But within 72 hours, if Governor Cuomo called, like the old black and white movies, you remember Angels with Dirty Faces? Yeah. There's Jimmy Cagney, death row. Oh, I don't want to die. Right? Remember that? The governor himself cannot stay an execution of a dog or a cat whose time has run out.
I didn't know that.
On day 1, that will end. And it's not that we're going to be doing it in New York City. It's already done in Los Angeles. It's called no-kill shelters, Austin, other cities. A society that takes care of its animals, will take care of its homeless, will take care of its emotionally disturbed. But it starts with law and order and public safety. Hopefully I've answered some of the questions. I could go on and on and on and on. But we'll save that for another day. I need your help to win the primary, but more importantly, the general election. Because I know already that the Democrats understand that I'm a Republican like no other. Different than Rudy, different than Bloomberg, different than Pataki, who did great jobs. 20 years of mayoral Republicans, we didn't have these problems. 12 years of a Republican governor, we didn't have these problems. But the one thing that I have that they don't have is that I'm in the hood.
Yeah.
And the Democrats know that. So they're going to have to convince the people that I'm a racist, that I'm a sexist, that I'm misogynist, that I'm homophobic. And I'm going to have to defend my honor because I'm none of those or anything else they accuse me of. You know what the Democrats are going to want to do. They're going to say, this guy is different than any Republican we ever ran against. He's running also as an independent. He's on the animal welfare line. He's in neighborhoods where Republicans never went before. We've got to destroy him, create an image of him in the minds of people who don't know him. So help me defend my honor. Help me fight the good fight for common sense government. And most importantly, help me win in November so that we can... Obviously, we can use any moolah shmoolah scarol. Anything you got, as John Catsimatidis so aptly pointed out, that's the one area we're hurting the most. We've got to build up the firewall. But also we have to register. We're registering the Independent Line Now through signed petitions, and the Animal Welfare Now. Rob Becerra has been an animal rights activist working with my wife Nancy long before I even understood all of this, years and years ago. And he's collecting signatures. All you got to do is sign. We get 3,750 signatures that are all kosher, all valid, and we will have another line where someone can vote for me who never in their life would vote for a Republican. My own father and mother never voted for Ronald Reagan. They voted for Rudy Giuliani. They were lifelong Democrats. But if they knew that these men and women that they were voting for had a line other than Democrats, so they felt they weren't disrespecting their grandparents, like a lot of that generation, they would have voted for them on an independent line, or in this case, first ever animal welfare line. Only one issue, no kill shelters. So please sign the petition before you leave. Thank you.